Hey guys, welcome back to the kitchen. Today we're going to build a countertop. So last week we finished installing the cabinets and putting the panels on and getting them all really nice and making them look awesome. So the next step is a countertop, and then after that is going to be a backsplash, and then I can finish the electrical, and then we can really kind of start moving in here. That electrical is the last thing that keeps us from using the space. And I can get the appliances in, and that's going to be awesome. But before we get there, we have to do a counter. So if you remember earlier on when I started this whole project, I did a test of an epoxy pour countertop, and that's what this is right here. And the whole point of the test was to see what the sheen that we liked was. Both of these look pretty good in here. I have no complaints, but if I get the light just right, you can see this is the shiny one, and that's the matte one, and we decided we wanted to go with the matte. I think our overall color isn't going to be quite this dark and gray. It's going to have a lot more white in it. But generally speaking, that's what we're going to end up with. And it's going to go along that wall and be an L up to the stove. And then there's another 6-footer right there. The island is probably going to be something different entirely. We're thinking a butcher block of some kind. But we have to build about 11 feet by 5 feet in an L and then a separate 6-footer one. And to do that, we're going to use all this MDF. Now, in the past, I've built a couple of these. If you haven't seen that, I'll leave links. You can go see those. Even in the instructions, this is Stone Coat Epoxy. They actually sent it to me. I've worked with them a number of times, and I really, really appreciate it because it's a great product, and it turns out really well. So go check them out. Links to that in the description, all that kind of stuff. In their instructions, they say just do a single layer of 3/4 MDF and then add kind of a front lip. So double it up just for an inch at the front end of it to make it look like it's double the thickness. That way you don't have it quite as heavy and you kind of save on materials. There's just not waste to it. There's no reason to make the whole thing double thickness. Well, I'm going to ignore that. In this case, I'm going to do double thickness with the MDF across 1, 2 of these big counters, mainly to future-proof it. If Katie decides 10 years from now that she wants granite, she wants quartz, she wants a real solid stone of some kind, and we build this everything perfect to match at a 3/4 inch thickness, all those finished countertops come in at 1 3/8 to 1.5. So all of a sudden, this will finish out at 36 3/4. It's going to be a sheet of this stuff, thicker, taller than what we're designed here at, which is 36 inches. So I'm going to double it up, mostly just to future-proof it, but a little bit to add some strength to it too, because like here, over the dishwasher space, there is nothing to support it. It's just free spanning this gap right there. And MDF, if you don't know, isn't super strong. So if you had somebody standing in the kitchen and decide they wanted to take a seat and jump up and sit on there, they could crack right through that. So there's a little bit in my head that says I should double it up just to make it stronger. Kind of like the same thing at a sink here. This is going to support and this is going to support, but that sink is 22 inches deep. So this is going to get cut back a long way and this is going to get cut back a long way. So now you have a pretty heavy sink that's going to be able to hold a lot of water, which gets even heavier. And really the only thing that's holding it is about 1.5 inches here and 1.5 inches in the back. That's if I had just one layer of MDF. Well, that again is another reason why we're going to double it up. So maybe I'm going to regret it. I don't think I am. But to do it gets a little complicated. The long counter is 11 feet by 5 feet, and a sheet of MDF is only 8 feet. So I actually have to make it longer and then stick out the other side. But to double it up gets tricky because the countertops are going to be 25 inches deep. They're 24-inch cabinets. They're going to be a 1-inch overhang. So I need 25-inch rips off of these 3 sheets of MDF, which doesn't leave me another 25-inch rip. It's going to leave me with something a little bit short on the other side. So when I'm doubling this up, I'm going to have the top surface be as few pieces as I possibly can be. You know, just 1, 2, kind of like 3 long chunks and we're done. But then the bottom, which I'm going to make out of the thinner remnants, they'll end up being about 23 inches, will get glued across the back. And then I'm gonna have to take a whole bunch of 2-inch strips of whatever's left over and fill in the gaps. But that'll all be on the bottom. It'll all get glued, laminated together really, really well. And when it's all said and done, it just has to hold itself together because the epoxy will hide everything from the top. Once we pour the epoxy on the top, any gap, any crack, anything that I didn't want to see will just get overwhelmed by epoxy, and then it will be a hard candy coating and hide all of that. So at this point, I need to just start ripping MDF at 25 inches and then start piecing together. We're going to start with the L and then the little piece over there and assemble the base for the countertop. It's time to glue up the whole monolithic countertop thing out of the different pieces that are happening. First of all, I don't care about this floor. This floor is going to get ripped up and burned by the time we're done. So the plastic isn't to save the floor. It's to keep the MDF from sticking to the floor if glue seeps through it during this process. If I didn't do that, I might destroy it just trying to flip it over to get to the other side. So the plastic keeps this from getting stuck, but then later on, when we're doing the epoxy pour, we're going to dump epoxy over the whole thing, and it's going to run off the edges, and it's going to pool on the floor, and it's going to be a mess. And again, I don't care about the floor, but there are big cracks in it. I can see through that crack down to the subfloor, and then there's a crack running this way through that subfloor, and there's a bunch of stuff like that through here. So if I just let the epoxy run onto the floor, it would go down and probably be stuck to the ceiling of the room below me. Don't want to deal with that, so the plastic is there to just keep things tidy. The other thing is, this is sitting perfectly against this is sitting perfectly against this. I'm not even going to try to glue those joints and pull them together. I think I'm going to fight that more than it's worth. Instead, just exactly where it's sitting, I'm going to take my strips and I'm going to glue it down and set it down and brad nail it in place with short enough brad nails so that it won't go all the way through into the floor. And just lock this piece together exactly the way it sits. Then when it's dry, I will flip it over to the top side. And if there is any sort of a gap here in this seam, I'll just mix up a little bit of epoxy right then, dump it in that crack, fill that crack, and sand it back off, because there's going to be a lot of shaping and sanding that goes into this anyway. It really doesn't matter what this thing looks like going into the end, because we're gonna paint it, then cover it with epoxy, and all these little imperfections are going to get hidden really, really effectively. So there's nothing left but to switch you over to a time lapse, because I'm not going to try to talk through this whole thing, and start slapping glue down. It's been just a bit since the last time I turned the camera on this project, so let me walk you through what we've got going on so far. Glued it all up on the ground, got it really right, flipped it over, got it up on sawhorses so I could work on it. And the first thing is we decided it wasn't deep enough. I made it originally about right. Got it scribed to the wall so that it would slide right up against it, and there'd be, you know, a seam thin enough that the backsplash would cover up that gap between it and the wall. But in doing so, the counter got just narrow enough that I wasn't really happy with the overhang once you consider the doors and drawers that are going to stick out just a little bit from the face frame underneath it. Now, I did some research and I kind of just got bad information when I did that. and I only made it 25 inches. It should be more like 25 and a half. Now we're at 25 and kind of like 5/8 now that I've added this strip right here. So I cut a piece that was about 1 9/16, just a hair thicker than 2 sheets of MDF, so that it would hang down a little bit below, and then I could clean it up after that. But what this does is 2 things. 1, give me more depth, and 2, if I come over here and just look at it end. So normally you have it look like this. It's not normally solid like that, but you end up ripping off a trim piece to make it look like it's double the thickness. So it's probably 3/4 inch tall by about 1 inch deep. And the other countertops that I've made like this, that epoxy rolls over and drips off the side and coats this well enough, but every one of them, you can see a line here. You can't see that there's a gap. I don't have any gaps. It was all glued up really nicely, but you could just tell that there is a line across this whole edge of stuff. And I think that has something to do with the smooth surface versus the porous sort of end grain of it. And when that smooth surface doubles up right there in the middle, you get a line. I've noticed it. It's not bad. It's not unsightly. It's not a crack. I just don't really like it. So now I have a smooth front edge the whole way around, and we're going to avoid that line. Awesome. You can see here I've got some, this is wood putty. It's basically Bondo for wood. I filled in a few gaps and cracks that I didn't like seeing. It's more than likely that when I do the epoxy pour over the top, all those gaps and cracks were going to get filled anyway, but I don't want any imperfections in this thing. So I'm going to try to make this as perfect as possible right from the start. It might be unnecessary, but I'm doing it anyway. So I have all this good to go. I have the same thing. I've filled this crack and this crack where the pieces on top came together. And on this the MDF edge grain that's now facing up instead of out, this should have enough epoxy sitting on it that it won't be a big deal. But I did actually go through and sort of smear some goo on there and sand it back to flush so that that is sealed up really well too. Same thing down here. So this is the other side counter. Kind of the same operation going on. Added the 2 strips to the ends. Rounded that corner over because this is going to be the corner that comes closest to the front door. So when you come in the front door and you come into the kitchen, that corner would be a hip catcher. So we rounded it off real nice to make it so it's not quite so painful and dramatic when you run into it. So we've got 1 and 2 counters ready to go. The next steps are going to be to round over the top and bottom edges. The top edge, the round over is kind of aesthetic. It's kind of, make it look and function the way we want it to. But it also makes that epoxy flow over that edge when you start this pour. So you also have to do it to the bottom. I'm going to do a much smaller round over, a little bit of a radius on the bottom, but I'm going to do it there too because you need it to also flow back a little bit to actually make this whole surface look as though it's a real piece of stone instead of goo poured together. So a little bit of sanding left to do, then a bunch of work with the trim router. Then I'm going to flip it over, do the radius on the bottom sides, and then we're going to waterproof the bottom sides with some Red Guard. All right, that wraps up the 3rd coat of the epoxy undercoating. This gives it a really nice, bright, solid white base to dump all of the different transparency levels of epoxy that go over the top of it. So if there's anything clear that gets actually shown all the way through, you just hit this nice white spot instead of the ugly MDF. But the instructions, this is the stuff right here, just stone coats epoxy undercoat. step 1 instructions on the back. It says I only needed 2 coats, but I dumped more into my paint tray than I really needed, so I went for a 3rd coat. Sanding in between really, really lightly. If you sand too much, you kind of burn right through it, right back to the MDF, and then what was the point? So the next thing would be to cut a sinkhole into this, but we've decided we're going to do that after the fact. We're going to do the pour first, and then we're going to install it, and then we'll cut the sinkhole in place. The main reason for that being, once we cut it, we only have a little bit of material at the front and back, and I'm afraid with as heavy as this is, we might break or crack or do something foolish and ruin all this work. So we're going to cut it in place, and then we'll reseal that seam with something waterproof, maybe the Red Guard, maybe epoxy, maybe something else. But this is now all ready for the pour, and that's going to have to wait for the next video. I've got enough other things going on. I'm going to go help my father-in-law do a job that he needs a second set of hands with. And I've got to get some research done. The weather has gotten cold around here. The furnace is running. It would be the time of year that I am burning firewood pretty constantly at this point. So I went to clean the chimney and found that the clay or terracotta or whatever you want to call it, the liner inside of my brick chimney is deteriorating. There was a bunch of big chunks of it down at the bottom at the clean out when I went to clean out all the soot. So that means it's time to put a liner in this thing. And I haven't got a clue as to what I'm doing there yet. I've got to do some research. I know it takes a big metal pipe that goes down and connects to the fireplace so that it pretty much just bypasses the existing chimney. That chimney just becomes the tube that the new chimney runs through. And I just need to get some of that figured out. I do know it's going to be more expensive than I'd like. You know, it seems like just a couple of lengths of tubing shouldn't be that much money, but it's got to be corrosion resistant. It's got to be a certain level of steel. So it's just something I have to figure out, and that kind of has to happen quick because right now it's time to be burning wood and getting this place heated up. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. Make sure you come back to check out next week's video because it's going to be the biggest, most impressive epoxy pour that we've done so far. Katie's going to be in charge of it. I'm just going to be here to do what she tells me to and get it, you know, poured out and decorated the way she wants it for her kitchen. That should be a fun one. It's going to happen in the next couple of days, but that video will be next week. See you guys.